Good evening. Welcome to Mental Health Mondays. We are so glad to have you with us, joining us this evening. Today, we want to say, as always, we are brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church and also by Grace House Cincinnati, a nonprofit and ministry of Saving Grace Community Church based here in Lockland. Once again, this week we have with us as our special um, guest to give us insight, Dr. Quentin Moss. My brother.
It's great to be here again. Hey, thank you for the invitation.
Good evening. Dr. Moss, as you know, is the founder, president, and CEO of Modern Psychiatry. Tonight, we are going to deal with, and we are operating from the topic, getting our thoughts together. Getting our thoughts together. And really, Dr. Moss, when we think about getting our thoughts together, any one individual can have thoughts that range from the left to the right, to good to bad, positive, negative, nice to bad. In fact, some, depending upon who you speak to and what study that you read, on average, it's believed that all of us each day have almost 6,000 to as far as 80,000 thoughts a day.
That's right.
And one study even suggests that 80% of those thoughts are negative, and with a lot of those thoughts, whether they're negative or positive, 95% of them being repetitive. And so, what is a thought? I mean, we have thoughts, but from a clinical perspective or through the lens of a clinician like yourself, what's a thought?
Back in the days of psychodynamics and psychoanalytic theory, they thought the thought was cathexis, meaning mental energy, mental effort.
Okay.
If we study this, we know that the thought is really a combination of various neurons which are releasing chemicals and electricity, along a certain pathway. And so we have many of these neurons and pathways that are occurring in our brain, and it stimulates what we believe to be thought. And it originates in many parts of the brain, and depending on what part of the brain is being activated, it produces those types of thoughts. And we can now see this on neuroimaging with functional MRIs. We can ask folks to do tasks and to think about certain things, and certain parts of the brain will light up, or certain parts of the brain will use glucose. And we can see this. So we know that the brain, is the origin of the thought, but it doesn't mean that the brain is outside the realm of what occurs spiritually or where God has his work.
So a thought from a biological or physiological standpoint, we can see that we got them.
Yes.
And so, but from a diagnostic standpoint, though we can tell when they begin and will they end, we still can't quite have discovered how to determine what a person's thinking about.
We haven't reached that point yet, in being able to decipher the thought that someone has. We can't read minds as much as people think that we can do that in psychiatry. We can infer, we can deduct, but we really can't read minds. But God is able to read minds.
Yes.
And God is able to understand our thoughts, even from afar off, and even our most inner, deeper thoughts that we are not even cognizant of. God is able to understand that. But from man to man, no, I can't read anyone's thoughts.
So no, back in the day, no Amazing Preston. No, do we believe? Is there some validity in ESP? Is that something that has been proven to be true?
People have tried to study and measure that, but that's not something that's generally thought about in clinical medicine.
Okay. Kind of snake oil medicine, maybe. Okay. Well, the Bible is certainly clear. You're right about thoughts. Proverbs 23:7 says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And it can be said, and I think we alluded to it last week, a couple of weeks ago, that we really are what we think.
That's
We
right.
really are what we think. And someone said that thoughts become things. So choose a good one. And so we all have them. We all have, again, these myriad of thoughts. And so um, we can't control having thoughts, but can we manage what type of thoughts we have?
We can, and it's something that takes a great deal of work. As you mentioned, we have these, tens of thousands of thoughts that may go through our mind on any given day. And many of us believe that our thoughts are just, random, outpourings of what's going on in our biochemistry in our brain. But our thoughts really represent a couple of things. Our thoughts represent images, experiences, knowledge, discussions, words that we've heard and we've allowed to be deposited into our mind.
Hmm.
And then it's also a volitional or response to what's in front of us at any given time. If we have the ability to be very to be mindful and guard what we allow to be deposited in our mind,
Hmm.
and if we can develop the mental muscle to be able to monitor thoughts as they come and go in our mind, we're able to have a disciplined thought life. And I think that is part of what we try to do in recovery for folks who suffer from depression and anxiety, to
Hmm.
try to be more mindful of their thought life. And
Hmm.
also, as we think about what the word says in regards to being able to hold certain thoughts captive,
Yes.
because God understands the power of these thoughts for
Hmm.
good or for bad.
Yeah, because I mean, from a physiological standpoint, yes, we have them. Yes, we know how they're formed. Uh, but oftentimes, though, man can, as you said, man cannot, find out what's going on in the heart. God knows. Okay. But certainly our environment, what you say, and our experiences shape our thoughts.
Indeed, they do. Indeed, they do. We deposit some of these things into our subconscious, and they help and develop how we interpret the world around us, and,
Hmm.
and the type of thoughts that we have. You mentioned this issue of being able to control or manage our thoughts, and it's very important that we do that. And I'll just give you one example of why that's important. We talk about basketball. Basketball is big now. The Heat and the Lakers, and those guys have spent thousands of hours practicing shots. Right?
Right.
What they're doing, they're getting their what's going on in their neurology in their brain connected to what's going on in their muscles, so they can automatically do these things. They can automatically take these shots,
Hmm.
oftentimes without a lot of forethought.
Hmm.
When we allow ourselves to have a certain thought pattern,
Hmm.
we allow that thought pattern then to become automatic.
Hmm.
If we have an automatic thought pattern of good and thinking about the greatness of people and our abilities and our potential, then it just continues to reinforce that.
Hmm.
But if we have a negative thought pattern
Hmm.
about what someone has done to us, or how I don't like that person, or how much debt I'm in, or
Hmm.
how much pain I experience,
Hmm.
if we allow that thought pattern to continue and to continue, then it starts to recruit more and more nerves, more and more pathways. And then we get stuck in an automatic way of thinking about things. And we can look at that as a distorted thought pattern that we have in psychology that needs to be addressed.
Hmm.
Or we could think about it in another way, spiritually, in
Hmm.
creating a mental stronghold in
Yeah.
the way that we think. So,
Hmm.
again, it's very important that we learn to master being very mindful of our thoughts, and to make sure that we hold them captive if those things are unhealthy.
And that's critical because one of the things, one quote from Tony Evans that I always bring up is that Tony Evans talks about the fact that we can't necessarily, that thoughts are like birds. We can't control them from flying over our head, but certainly we can keep them from making nests in them.
That's right.
And the problem is that a lot of us have allowed some very negative thoughts, some very unhealthy thoughts to make their home and to nest in our head. And because they have nested in our head, the behavior that's manifested or comes through, comes from a rotten egg, from a rotten pot.
That's right.
And so you mentioned, and it's critical that because of the thoughts we have, they can shape our view of the world, view of people, our interaction with people. And someone else said that thoughts become perceptions, perceptions become reality. Alter your thoughts, you alter your reality.
So true. That is so true. We're learning more and more every day about again the power of these thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
We used to think that these thoughts was something that was terribly abstract.
Mm-hmm.
But now we understand that these thoughts actually build physical things. These thoughts actually build physical things within us. We understand that our body has a number of proteins that it creates that have a lot of different functions. When we have certain thought patterns, it allows us to release proteins that do a number of things. One, these proteins can create health for us, or they can create illness. Proteins can cause the release of inflammatory markers or chemicals in our bodies that lead to a great deal of difficulty with pain or arthritis. It can cause changes in our heartbeats and set us up for stroke or for heart attack.
Wow.
Some of these proteins can really then go in and unravel, believe it or not, some of our genetic code.
Wow.
Some of us can have genes that are very unhealthy, but they may lay dormant. But because of the thoughts and sometimes stress that we allow ourselves to experience, it takes these dormant, unhealthy genes, unravels them, and allows them to start to express themselves or things. So again, our thoughts actually do build physical things.
Wow.
And if we were to think about what our thoughts can do for our health in regards to maintaining appropriate weight, being able to have physical strength, being able to have mental acuity, to be able to concentrate and to focus, we can then extrapolate that our thoughts not only build physical things within us, but something that we already know, that it allows us then to build the physical nature that's around us.
So you
So
mentioned
our thoughts are very powerful.
you mentioned stress because some people, and certainly I know that when I'm stressed, it seems as though there's an interruption in the flow of thought that you really can't. Sometimes you can't get your thoughts together. And then if you ascribe to or believe what's said about man that we can't multitask, it's compounded because I'm all over. I'm trying to do two things. I got things going on, and it affects our focus. If we allow that. But you mentioned, and I want to ask you this. You mentioned that when we allow our thoughts to build and unravel and awaken something that's dormant. Uh, uh, do you believe that sometimes if there in a family, if there is historically or there has from generation to generation been um, a certain deficiency or a certain disorder that our thoughts can awaken that disorder?
Oh yes, most definitely. When we have certain thought patterns, and we talked about these chemicals that are released that are actually the makings of the thought, but other chemicals which are also very unhealthy. There are a number of hormones that we also secrete, which in the elevated levels are not healthy. Particularly cortisol being one of them. Our unhealthy thoughts can lead to increases in cortisol. So, what's the significance of that? For one, you talked about this issue of not being able to focus or concentrate. So, cortisol definitely affects that in a negative way.
Mhm.
But cortisol then affects our weight, It affects how our heart functions. It affects our blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
If we affect our weight, then we then create greater risk of diabetes. So it can lead to a cascade of medical illnesses simply from having a very
Wow.
undisciplined, unhealthy thought pattern.
Wow.
Not to mention the genes that are associated with diabetes and heart disease that may also be, unregulated because of what's going on with our negative thoughts.
So no thought is a simple thought, and every thought has its consequences.
It does. It does.
No matter how we belittle them or how we may see them as being significant or and unconnected and not related to what's going on health wise.
That's right.
And I think that's just amazing because oftentimes I think a strategy is to kind of reprogram our way of looking at things. Wouldn't you say, to help us with our negative thinking?
We need to find a way, one, to distract ourselves from that negative thought, but that negative thought has to be replaced with something else,
Okay,
right?
right.
Oh, that negative thought has to be confronted. It has to be changed. It has to be challenged. Otherwise, we just kind of passively go with what's kind of circulating in our head.
How you do that? How do you confront something that you know is negative? Again, this you're bombarded with some negative thoughts, far out thoughts. How do you confront yourself? I mean, do you slap yourself in the face? Do you make yourself? What do you do to get yourself together?
That's very good. In psychology, psychiatry, there's this type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy.
DBT, gotcha.
CBT. And part of what CBT does, it takes the thoughts that we have
Mm-hmm.
and it creates, there's a category of different types of thought patterns which are distorted. And one, we identify that.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to say, goodness, all, here's a good one, all men are dogs, all men are bad, right?
Okay, okay.
So that's
Somebody's not commenting, but they're saying amen. They just have. Go ahead. Okay.
But if we have that type of thought, that's like black and white thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
All good, all bad, that type of thinking. We identify that. But
Mm-hmm.
then we take someone and we take actually literally a sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
We start to write out what is the evidence that really supports the thought that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the evidence that you have that refutes that? And we
Mm.
take people down these various types of thought patterns that have, and we actually go through in the session, thought by thought by thought,
Mm.
train them how to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
then people actually start to do that at home
Wow.
with pencil and paper.
Mm-hmm.
And we do this in a way that over time it becomes automatic in our way, in our ability to be able to recognize these distorted thoughts and then to replace them what we know is the truth.
So it almost is like you have to turn into a prosecutor of your thoughts. That I'm going to prosecute my thoughts, and I'm going to show where it's not truthful, where these thoughts are not based in reality.
That's
It's
right.
more of a supposition, or they are a byproduct of some past experience, and I'm going to deal with
And that's exactly what we have to do. But, preacher, it takes work.
Yeah.
And so we have to be willing to be invested in that process. We have to be quite intentional in that process in order for us to be able to see the benefit. And this is one of the most tried and true ways of therapy, over the past 40 years. And it's shown to help people with depression,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, some elements of post-traumatic stress disorder, even people who have psychotic illness can use some of these tools to be able to better their thought life.
That's a great strategy. So, how can I help someone that I hear them not thinking rationally, or their thought, the thought process? Because all of us has a process. Can you talk a little bit about the process? We use that term loosely. Uh, my thought process, or what's your thought process? Can you explain what is meant by that? What's a thought process?
You know, The best way that I can describe that is this: we have some topic, some idea, something that is occurring.
Mhm,
What we're going to do unconsciously is take all the information from our subconscious, and some of that may include memories,
mhm.
past experiences, what we've seen other people do in response in situations like this, right? We're going to take all of that and we're going to then match that up against who we think that we are, what we think of that person, that situation, what we think of the world, what we think of our future. All of this happens very fast.
Mhm,
And then we come then to a conclusion, either one, what I think about this particular situation, or two, what my verbal responses or my physical response is going to be in this situation, right? Or
mhm,
three, what my bodily or my visceral response is going to be in that situation. And all of that takes place faster than you can throw a baseball pitch, very fast.
wow.
But again, the more in tune we are to how we come about our thoughts and the thoughts that come across, the quicker we are at catching this before we allow it to do any damage.
Right. So when we're thinking of something, we definitely have to hit delete or abort quickly.
Yes,
Once we figure that out, that the way I'm thinking, my thought process is not based on fact but more feeling, not on truth but on error.
that's
And
right.
when someone, perhaps that we're engaged in conversation, is not getting it or not understanding that their views are off center, we can walk them through. Can we just say, let's just write down everything you're saying and then match it to the reality? Would that be a great strategy to help them?
Well, I think that the first strategy, one, is to help them to understand that you're listening to what they're saying or you're watching what they're doing.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that we do a lot in medicine is being able to take the information that someone is giving us and we create a summary.
Okay.
And we do it all the time, not realizing that we're doing it.
Hmm.
So, one example might be, so what I hear that you're saying is this.
Reflective listening.
Reflective listening, it is exactly it. And
Hmm.
allow the person then to hear from someone else what they're portraying, at least what we would perceive to be their thought process.
Hmm.
It's almost as if we're both going to go to this whiteboard and we're going to
Yeah.
write on this whiteboard what you've just said and
Right.
allow us to take a pause to take a look at that. That is the first step.
Right.
Illuminate them and also validates not necessarily what they're saying, but it validates that someone is listening to
Hmm.
what they're saying.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, as I listen to that thought process, I'm reminded of a scripture in James as it relates to really sin. James chapter 1, verse 14. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So, the thought process, in terms of sin, there is a thought process. And I would think that it may be similar to something that's not simple, in that if something first has to be stimulated in your brain, something has to be something, because you can get lost in your thought, and whatever you're in, it can be revenge, it can be whatever, and you can get very satisfied in that thinking.
Right.
And then as you're impregnated with that thought, you can, then there is a delivery date of it, should you go full term with it.
That's right.
And so the challenge seems to be, Dr. Moss, for us to look at those exercises in which you speak of in terms of writing things out. But what's another way that we can make sure that we're not picking up stuff? Because I say all the time, and I give the illustration that some of the things we pick up in our thought life are just like when we wear black articles of clothing. Black articles of clothing, if you brush up against something, it's going to show.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you don't see those things to the end of the day, and you don't even remember brushing up against those things. And I think cognitively, that the same thing happens, is that sometimes we brush up against something, we
Hmm.
read something, We have a conversation about something
Right.
uh, on a myriad of subjects, and sometimes we can grab hold of that instead of pressing delete.
So I agree with you 100% there, Pastor. So I try, with my thought life, and I share with others to try to do the same. Is let's work on not putting the garbage in to begin with. So I have this thing that I've talked to folks about, regarding managing our inputs,
Mm,
managing those things that we get plugged into. Great example now is the election.
oh, yeah,
Whatever side you're on, folks are on. This is not the talk for that.
right.
You know, but it is so polarized and it's so negative
Mm-hmm,
that if we allow ourselves to be in front of CNN and Fox all day, we're
mm-hmm,
pouring in all of the negative stuff. So
mm-hmm,
then we're giving the building blocks to have unhealthy thoughts. If there's certain things on television that we know aren't healthy for us to watch, certain
mm-hmm,
things on the internet which are not healthy for us to watch, we need as best we can to be intentional and proactive and not allow those things to be poured in to
mm-hmm,
then become the building blocks for later, whether it's a great deal of violence, whether
mm-hmm,
it's things that are highly sexualized,
mm-hmm.
whether it's very negative interactions that we see on reality TV.
Right.
All of those things create the building blocks, unfortunately, for us to be able to have not only very negative thoughts, but also, again, setting the seed for us to have very negative behaviors. So I think it's key that we watch what we allow to be poured in, because that becomes part of the building blocks for our thoughts.
So what I hear you saying is that this whole thought life, this whole thinking about our thoughts and are that's something that it can be managed, but as you said, work has to be put into it.
That's right.
That is something that we can minimize, and that certainly we have to understand that a small thought can be blown up to or grow into something that becomes a major problem,
Hmm.
with also physical repercussions that we may consequences because of how we're thinking of that. Um, so if I'm a person that is struggling to go to sleep because my mind continues to race, I just keep thinking about everything. What can I do to calm the brain down? And uh, how can I make sure that my thinking doesn't result in me falling asleep and having a nightmare?
Oh goodness, man! If I had that all figured out, goodness. But here's some helpful tips.
Hmm.
Um, for one, I talked about just now about monitoring what we allow to be poured in, and particularly these things that we're allowed to be poured in before we go to sleep. A lot of Americans have the habit of going to sleep with the television going, right?
Hmm.
But many of us don't realize that even as we're drifting off to sleep,
Hmm.
brain is still recording those things that it has access to.
Wow. Wow.
So we're sending oftentimes subliminal messaging,
Mhm.
to our brain, depending on what we listen to before we go to sleep. So once I figured that part out, then I started, man, I started playing the Bible
Right.
in my earphones as I drift off to sleep.
Hmm.
They found a way to cheat to get more of the word in me, even as I'm going to sleep. So
Right.
that's one thing. Two, putting down electronic devices, very key and our ability to be able to kind of manage these things before we go to sleep. A third thing that we can do is those things that we're trying to get a solution for,
Hmm.
those things that we're concerned about,
Hmm.
writing those things down.
Okay.
And that does a couple of things. By writing these things down, it allows our brain to try to come up with a solution for those things while we're sleeping, believe it or not. So that's one. But two, by symbolically writing these things down,
Hmm.
perhaps on a piece of paper that we fold or in a journal that we close,
Hmm.
then we've told ourselves we're putting that away for now.
Hmm.
That I've given my energy to it. I've given my thoughts to it. Hopefully, I haven't worried about it, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting that away for now. And then lastly, the people that we talk to before we go to sleep
Mm-hmm.
need to be positive interactions.
Right. Right.
Don't let that be a negative interaction you go to sleep with, whether it's a spouse or whether it's a friend that you are texting, or
Mm-hmm.
try not to allow that to be the last interaction that you're going to sleep with, because that, of course, is going to cause a great disruption in our thoughts, with our mind racing, with the inability to sleep. But if I were to just take it further for trying to make sure that we get pretty good sleep,
Mm-hmm.
a cooler temperature, 68, 69 degrees for some people, complete darkness for those people who can tolerate that without having a great deal of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
No electronics in the room, no television, right? The bedroom should be only be for bedroom activities, and that's appropriate sex and going to sleep.
Right.
Outside
Right.
of that, no other activity should be happening in the bedroom. And then drinking only a little bit of water. As we get older, we don't want to drink too much too close to bedtime, because we got to get up in the middle of the night. But at the same time, we don't want to go to bed with a dry mouth, because that is also something that keeps folks up. So those are some basic tips that folks can take in regards to trying to promote, getting to a healthier routine with sleep.
Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome tonight, and I want to say it's been more than food for thought. Really, we can receive what has been talked about tonight as a call to action for us to guard our heart, guard our minds, and guard our soul, and to remember always that we are what we think,
Yeah.
and we have the ability to manage what we think. Thank you so much, and I thank all of you for listening tonight. And I hope and pray that something that was discussed helps you uh, be a better you, uh, feel better, be better, live better. Thank you. Good night.
All right.